Yeah, I was raised in a brigade home before I knew what brigade was. Dad actually pastored a church in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and I would have been between the age of 3 and 8 at that time. So this is back in the uh, first part of the 1950s, and I just remember being taken up to Camp Pukwudgies, which was the brigade camp that would now be New England Frontier, I guess, or New
Yeah.
England, whatever it's called. I've forgotten now. Anyway, yeah, on and I've got my dad kept a diary, very simple one, but I have many of the years of his diary, and in it, I have the one where it was going up to Pukwudgies on Sunday after or Monday morning and coming back Saturday night to preach at his church. And I think for 2 nights I slept in a cabin when I was about 8 years old. So, and it was in Alfred, Maine. Anyway, so that was the beginning, and there was a stockade in our church. I think a battalion in our church, but I was too young for all of that. We moved to Wheaton, or excuse me, we moved to a little town called Addison near Wheaton, Illinois, in 1950, 1955. And so that's when Dad went. He'd already gone, but he was there in Chicago in the Dearborn building where the national offices were. I think it was like on the 11th or 13th floor or something like that, down in the Chicago Loop. And that was also the year that I started going to a little stockade that was meeting at the Addison Bible Church. So Dad was he was doing the national stuff by then, and I was just a little kid learning, watching, going to things that Dad would be doing.
Yeah, and he started out as what we would say now as a regional director, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I forgot I forget which of those fellas that are in the book was the director before him, but Ken Hansen I knew as a kid, and his family much of my life.
Yeah,
A number of those fellas that were involved in those days.
it said that he was doing such a great job that they kept, trying to get him to be they call it the general director.
They did.
Okay, which was the president position, right?
Yeah, yeah, that title changed someplace after he was done.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
they finally convinced him.
that's what I have read. They did finally convince him. I mean, uh, Christian, the thing that struck me from my father's diaries, which I've read years ago after he died, but when he was a young person, he would write his like when he was 18, he would write, went to bed late, got up, then the next day it would say got up early, and sometimes that was defined as 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Got up early, very tired, very tired. That phrase was in there, and that's because my dad he really never slowed down, and yet he was not an anxious person. He was not a I've been with administrative type people who are very driven and just pushing, and I could probably even name at least one of the national presidents of Brigade that was more like that. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not who my dad was. He was far more pastoral in his leadership style, I think, and but worked like nobody I knew. And I've said this, I think, to Matt and others. I sometimes wonder if his short life was because he pushed so hard without ever slowing down. His teenage years, adult years, just wonder sometimes if that was part of his life-ending story too.
Yeah, I know he passed very young. How old were you?
I was 29, he was 56.
Oh, he was only 56. That is
Yeah.
very
I was
young.
three.
Pardon me?
I
You
was
were three.
three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Matt barely knew him.
Yeah. You probably don't have memories, do you, Matt? Do you have
No,
some memories?
I personal memories. No, I remember visiting him in the hospital. That's it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and so when you asked to have a get together talk about Grandpa Bubar, I knew I wasn't gonna have much to add to it. I really wanted to just kind of sit here and firsthand listen to Dad talk about him. That's really why I joined in today. But yeah, the only personal memory I have of him was one visit to the hospital shortly before he passed away, and then I remember being at his funeral. Yeah,
Huh.
don't remember much of it, just running around through the pews, um, and
There
taking a
were
picture in the driveway. That's what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, there were two services. So one in the church that he was pastoring in, and then in the church that I grew up in when Dad was with Brigade.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
Huh.
I mean, I imagine a lot of people came out because from the article that I was reading, just, I mean, he was an incredible source, the kindest man. And like you said, I got the same kind of feel that he was just very pastoral, like very caring, and just had a charisma that sounds like it attracted. I mean, he doubled, not even doubled, like the numbers in here of where he took Brigade from, where it was struggling, which I can relate to a lot of struggle with Brigade, but he
Yeah.
just had this vision like, no, God has that this is something that should be in all churches, and this is something that America, it says, that he said needs,
yeah,
and was just so passionate about that. But I mean, the work that he did was, and then brought on so much staff. I mean, he knew how to pick the right people for the right positions.
and I'm telling you, they impressed me as a boy because I was in Brigade all the way up through Northwoods, and I mean, there's been a piece of Brigade story in my life, most decades of my life until just recently. But yeah, when you think about, I'm trying to think of his last name, Dave Hendrickson or Dave Hendricks, I forget. But he was one of the guys that I knew at camp. I'd know them from Camp Cascatoa. And that was another whole thing. My dad was so involved in building the camping
Yes.
ministry. I remember going with him to the property that became New England Frontier and uh, being wowed by all the details of Keezer Lake and this beautiful place. And the brigade was able to somehow buy that property back in the 1960s, I guess. You have
Yeah.
to be in the 60s, yeah. So a lot of pieces to that. And the fun part for me, of course, is that not only my generation, my brother and I both were Herald of Christ. We went through the whole brigade program. But then Matt's generation and then his son's generation at least have participated in different ways in that brigade ministry, camping ministries especially. Pretty
What
neat.
what is just a memory that you have, it can be Brigade related or not, like some
Uh,
one or two memories. I mean, there's so many, but just
yeah. Yeah, I guess it's not a particular memory, but I always felt that when my father was in the house, he had time for his sons and my sister too. She probably got better treatment than we did, but nonetheless,
Mhm.
always had time for us. And I think he was generous with us in that regard. I didn't know how engaged he was with ministry at that point. Um, so I always felt that way. That had a great impact, I think, on who I am. And yeah, lots of memories, riding in the car. I mean, we drive across from the Midwest to the East Coast. Dad would speak in different churches from Highland Park Baptist up in Detroit, Michigan, to some little church in New England. And we'd be sitting in the back of the Chevy wagon. Off we go. We'd be doing brigade work. It was who he was.
yeah.
He
And
loved it.
your mom, how was she supportive in this and just kind of came along?
Yeah, I think mom Mom had her own life, and that as is today, I'm sure the same. Brigade couldn't pay a whole lot of money, so my mom, when my youngest brother started school, entered the teaching profession and became a school teacher. And she did that. She was a musician in the church, so she was extremely occupied with life and family, but very supportive as far as I always could tell. I can remember one thing. This is a not a very significant point, but one point when I was probably 18 or 19, my dad said something to my mother that she considered not true. And I remember hearing her say, "That's the first time he's ever lied to me." And I thought, well, that probably is true, because I thought of my dad as being just, he wasn't Abraham Lincoln, but he was very honest. Uh, and yeah, but mom was very, very supportive of all that he did. And Christian, when she became a widow at age 53, she was 3 years younger than my dad, and she was never going to marry again. There was never going to be anybody that could take Joe Bubar's place. And as a bit of an aside, I think she was probably 88 when she thought she was lonely and wished that there was a man in her life. And I said, "Mom, it's probably too late for that. There's nobody out there that wouldn't be more of a problem for you than a blessing." So, but yeah, they
True,
had a
yeah.
great relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she did lose him young, and in
Yeah.
that culture, that was harder and
Yeah.
different than it is now, even
It's true.
harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that about him, because sometimes when leaders are so engulfed in the ministry and have that passion, sometimes the family, feels that neglect, but it sounds like it was just, you were just part of it. And I love that you said that he had time for his sons, which is exactly what, again, what Brigade is,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Making
Yeah.
that time.
It
Uh,
was his life. And he believed, he really believed. I don't know that I can remember him articulating it, but and it's, to me, the reason for Brigade is that it was a disciple making ministry. And it wasn't just a boys program. I mean, every church I've been connected with, they says, "Oh yeah, I remember Boys Brigade," and they tell a story about it. But for so many, it was just a program of the church. But in the life of a young person, it was um, it was discipleship. It was life on life. It wasn't just, we had the handbooks, we had things we need to memorize, we had things to read, we had things we had to do, pass these achievements. But in all of that, it was life on life. And my dad was an example of that in an unofficial way because of who he was. And I would say my experience as going to Stockade, which I don't remember too much, but battalion for sure. Those men had an impact on my life that it's just there. And I can't. One was an electrician. One was had been a missionary pilot, and was, I don't even know what he was doing anymore back in the Chicago area. So that was passed on, is all I'm saying, from one generation to the next.
yeah,
Pre me.
I like how you said that, life on life.
Yeah.
Life on life. There was something that your dad said, I'm going to read. The only material God has given us from which to build men is boys,
Yeah.
he often said. If we are to meet this need, we must begin to prepare men for Christian responsibility while they are still boys. And he just goes on to say he wants to see young men, in the churches, able to effectively serve God and walk every day in their life and dedicate their future lives, to Christian ministry here and around the world. And your family is an example of that in
Yeah.
everything you do. I mean, Matt and I don't know each other really well, but from what I know of you, Matt, the Bubar family here was doing that and is doing that. And I mean, your dad is just living on through you guys.
Yeah. We don't think of it consciously, but when I reflect on it, I think I'm so grateful for how he affected generations, really, because it's not just me and my brother. It's Matt's family and his boys. And you know, I can't put a finger on why God blesses some families, but if you could be tangible in this regard, there's a place for the structured programs where life on life can happen in the context of that. So 19, I would have been 10, 1957, Dad and Mom did one, I think it's the only time they did anything international other than Canada, which is international, but in a different way. They went to Costa Rica and visited in May of that year, Joe Coughlin. And
Okay.
I remember having to, I think my grandfather stayed with us at the time, kind of waiting for them to come home. They didn't even bring anything back that I recall. but but that was kind of the story started flowing about Joe Coughlin. And in our home, I mean, we lived in I've seen the Brigade office. I would say probably a house a little smaller than that. It wasn't a very big house. Um, but Howard Hendricks from Dallas Seminary, Joe Coughlin, just a number of notable Christian educators and visionary people would have dinner at our table, and then they'd be gone, or they might spend the night and then they'd be gone. So I was influenced. I had the privilege of rubbing shoulders at least a little bit as a kid with some amazing, amazing people because of Dad's life. But yeah, he and Coughlin were, I think, very good, had a very good relationship. And I was around long enough to see Joe come back to the States.
Also, Sam Gray. Are you familiar with Sam Gray? He worked.
Yeah,
I remember that name.
yeah, I was actually on the national board in the 1980s and early 90s, I think, late 80s, early 90s, and Sam was president. So Arnie Swanson, Sam Gray
Yes.
were the leaders at that point in time. Jerry White was on the board, who had or became the head of the Navigators Ministry. Those are pretty significant moments for me. I was a young pastor, but I think because of my heritage and the fact that don't tell anybody this, but we turned an Awana church to a Brigade church, which didn't happen a whole lot.
That
And
is very rare. It's usually the opposite.
I know, but this is an aside also. I got to tell you, we did a study, and not for publication, but we did a study in our church, and the people of the church didn't want to do this rather simplistic program for the kids anymore. They wanted something that had some more, if I can put the word meat to it. So we started Stockade, I think, battalion as well. And yeah, we did when Matt was a kid.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt, did you want to say something?
No, I just was affirming that, yeah, we started
Yeah.
battalion at that church as well.
Yeah. So I ended up on the board.
So Joe,
5 years, yeah.
talk to me about your time on the board, because there's a lot in this book that I've been reading. Like almost every 20 years, we try to get rid of units. We're like, oh, this unit thing isn't working. Let's do a new initiative.
No.
And then we still have the units. And then the next 20 years, oh, wait, this unit thing isn't working. And it was kind of like this cycle. And also a lot of hard times, a lot of possible closing the doors. And I know this is only the first 50 years.
Yeah.
So, 80s and 90s, like what was happening then? You're on the board.
It wasn't easy by any means. I think Sam was a pretty good encourager as the leader of Brigade at the time. He was analytical. He could crunch numbers more than other people perhaps, but he didn't give up. And I'm trying to think, Brigade moved from, as I remember it, from the Dearborn building in Chicago to Cross Street in Wheaton, where they had an office, and a two-story building. I think I shared it with Pioneer Girls, even, as I recall. And I wasn't on the scene in those days, but then they built out in Carroll Stream, or got a building out in Carroll Stream. It was a newer building. And that was where they were until, in fact, they may have had a couple of them out there until they moved, I think, to New York. But yeah, there was always a cutting back. And the biggest struggle perhaps was, shall we start a girls program? Pioneer Girls was going to start a boys program, or had. Should we start? No, we're in the boys business. We're in the boys business. And the guys never budged on that, and they felt strongly about it. And I don't know how strongly I felt. I only had raised 3 boys, so I didn't know what to suggest if it was going to be about girls. It was be totally different than anything I would be comfortable guiding at that point. I think in terms of some of the achievement structures, the issue of the Vietnam War played quite heavily, when being military was no longer a value in our country, unfortunately. And I think Brigade, from a human perspective, paid a price at that point.
Yeah.
We weren't trying to turn them all into soldiers, but it was a great motif of how we would raise these kids. And there was also leadership change. Dad finished Brigade. Well, let's see. I think 1965. You've got the numbers probably, but and then I was off to college, and I kind of missed out on what Brigade was all about until I started raising kids myself.
And then,
But those
then it
couple
came
of
back
difficult.
around.
Yeah. So, but I know at those board meetings, there was always those discussions of what changes should we make. We didn't really make many, except we updated the books.
Yes.
It was new. The stockade logs were new, and some of the ways that we did the 1, 2, 3 star stuff was new.
Well, I thought something was interesting because we interviewed Bruce Baker.
Oh, did you?
Coast. Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful guy.
92. And he had a lot of information, so sharp.
Yeah.
But he was telling us that Brigade, when it first started and in the early years, you had to start battalion first with no exceptions. And that Sam Gray was the one that came in was like, no, if somebody wants to start a stockade, we're going to let them.
or tree climbers. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, he said, because we asked why, and he said it was mainly because they wanted the churches to see it as like a men's program, a young men being developed into leaders, and not as like a little boys, Sunday school. And if you just have stockade and tree climbers, you're going to think of it as boys. But this way the boys can look up, but a lot of churches, especially now, are struggling with young men. There's a lot more things that are tearing for their attention, sports, especially, and different clubs and such. I can relate. I have 2 teenagers. So, yeah.
When our kids were our kids and the boys in our church were in, some of them, and my peers too, they were in sports and Brigade, and some did quite well. I could name some of my peers' names that are walking with the Lord. One's a doctor, one's a retired pilot. They were in the little free church battalion, and some of them were in sports, but it was high school. It wasn't club sports.
Right.
So you just had to deal with the week schedule. And can you believe this? Back in the day, on Wednesday nights, the schools would not have any programs. So churches could have their programs on Wednesday nights. And of course, they would never do anything on Sunday back 100 years ago.
I was just going to say, I believe it, because I remember, I'm 45, but I remember when Sundays shut down. Even gas stations were not, nothing was open on Sundays. You had to do everything on Saturday. I mean, now nothing ever closes, it feels like.
Yeah. So there's some things that have changed that we don't have any control over all of that. But I do remember when you brought that up, I remember thinking now, battalion was what it was about, and stockade was the add-on, and then tree climbers to that. But it's probably not that way anymore, I assume.
No, now, we're thankful for anyone that wants to start a unit.
Yeah.
But we are now kind of looking into initiative of tree climber dads, kind of something that we're exploring and actually putting a lot of work into, because it's kind of reverse now. Dads and sons, getting them to spend time together first and then grow up. Because I think in the culture now, getting teenagers cold start, it's not the same as it was,
Yeah.
in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, even the 70s. Teenagers are very different, cultures very different. So getting them to want to just come to a club like that, even church, even to get them to church, there's a lot of, especially after COVID, there's not a lot of people going back to church now.
Yeah.
Let
We
alone,
see that as well.
are you seeing that? You're in
Yeah,
Tennessee too, right?
yes. Yeah. I mean, our numbers are getting better, but I I bump into people all the time because we've spent the money on the electronics so they can stay home, watch church if they want. And I think that's the beginning of the exodus.
Was the beginning of the
Yeah.
exit. So
Yeah.
you're pastoring now, right?
No, no, well, not officially. They call me staff, but I don't pick up a paycheck. So what does that make you? I'm a good volunteer like everybody else. So I do some things in the church and some with retirees and a few other things. Yeah.
You guys have a legacy of pastors, because your grandpa was a pastor too, right?
Both of them, actually. Both of my grandfathers were, and both of Matt's grandfathers were. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
my
your brothers were all pastors too, right? And then your sister married a pastor. I read that correctly, right?
Yeah, you're very close. I have one brother. He just retired he only pastored two churches. He just retired in St. Joe, Michigan, this last spring. And my sister, if you can believe this, and her husband, they went back to Uganda. They were missionaries in Pakistan once upon a time. They've gone back to Uganda because their only child is a missionary there. And at age 78, they're they're doing missions work in a pretty tough place.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a pretty rich heritage that's gone on, lineage, I guess.
Yeah, it's
We're
in your
grateful.
blood.
I guess so because you don't think of it that way, right? But
But it's not every family, that does that. It's definitely a calling and an anointing, I would say.
yeah,
Yeah, over
yeah,
your family.
yeah.
Uh,
And with that, Matt's generation, two of them are Matt's two brothers are on pastoral or on church staffs. Uh, Joe the third, I'm the junior. Joe the third he went after Wheaton College with a degree in music to Scottsdale Bible Church in Arizona. He's still there 30 some years later. He's the director of instrumental music for the church. And Tim, who was, can I just say, he was the family clown. We wouldn't have taken Tim too seriously as a boy. Uh, he was the guy that brokered humor as well as anybody. He ends up becoming a pastor and is on staff here at the church that we're at. But I always tell people God put Matt in this family because he knew somebody's got to pay the bills. So, yeah,
Matt is still
We
doing
all we all have a role to play.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt is still doing so much ministry too.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, to me, and Matt remembers this, I think. I used to say to the boys, don't go into the pastoral ministry unless you absolutely are confident that God has called you to that. Bill Bright would have said, make sure God hasn't called you. And if he hasn't, then you got to go into ministry. And so mine was just a flip flop of that. And, but I used to say to Matt and others, meet the qualifications of an elder and God can do whatever he wants with your life. And and for women, you can paraphrase that however you want, but it's God at the center of your life, and then God can do whatever He wants. So yeah, we're seeing another generation after Matt's coming along, following Jesus,
Yeah.
being discipled perhaps now as young adults.
Well, we just have to make it full circle and get one of Matt's sons on our board now.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. There's probably a couple of them that are ready, but
Okay, I'm being serious, Matt, because
I
we need
know.
some
Yeah.
young people on our board.
Yeah,
Right. Give
Yes.
him a few years.
yeah.
Okay. They're just
Give him a
in
few years.
who came back with you to get the sword? I forgot.
That was
Is that
Coleman.
Luke? Oh,
Coleman.
Coleman.
That's your youngest though, right?
No, he's the middle boy. Isaac's the youngest. He'll graduate high school in the spring.
Okay.
And Coleman is the middle one. He's a sophomore at Taylor University in Indiana. And then Luke's the oldest. And Luke's
Yes.
planning to get married in May.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is exciting.
Yeah.
Grandparenting is right around the corner.
We'll see.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Matt, could you add any, because you grew up in Brigade, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I was the scent of it was always around, put it that way. But um, when I was young, well, I remember going, this was in the 70s, up to, I guess it would have been Northern Frontier Camp, maybe,
Yeah.
for a
New England.
stockorama. New
New
England
England.
Frontier Camp. New England
Yeah,
Frontier Camp, yeah. For a stockorama.
yeah.
Before I was old enough to be a part of the program, but Dad was going, and I tagged along and slept in the tent, and so I remember that. Then church didn't have stockade at the time. Well,
It
then we moved.
we did have
And
it, Matt. We did have it in Skowhegan, Maine.
Skowhegan, but I was too young.
Oh, oh yes, yeah,
Yeah, so that's when we went to I tagged along to the stockorama. Then we moved
yeah.
to Wisconsin, no stockade. But when I was old enough for battalion, that was right about the time that Stockade and Battalion started there. So I was involved with the battalion program and then was real involved at Camp Nathaniel in Minnesota during those years.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, then kind of, through college, no involvement, moved to Western New York after college. There was battalion there at the Wesleyan Church and was helping out with that's how I met Scott
Yeah.
originally. I was helping out with the battalion with Ted Morton and Dave Guerra. That's funny, I remember those names. That was a long time ago. Yeah. And then eventually met Scott because I think he was just doing stockade at the time. And anyway, that was how that connection happened. But yeah, I always remember, Dad was on the board when I was like middle school, high school aged and things like that. And of course knew of Grandpa and his affiliation with Brigade over the years. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was my involvement.
I think, Matt, I don't want to exaggerate this because it seems like a big number, but I think that we just celebrated like 50 years at Revive with Christian Service Brigade.
Was that right? Yeah.
Something, yes.
Something big,
My
huh?
memory does not serve me well, but yeah, it was
Yeah.
something like a very high number of being at Revive for that long.
Oh, wow,
And
yeah.
Scott has been a huge component of that, especially
Yeah.
these past years, keeping Brigade alive and running strong over
Sure.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a fella, because I remember about Hamburg when I was a young person, so I believe that those numbers are right. There was a guy. Was his last name Webster? He carved wood.
Maybe.
I have a couple of the pieces that were at Northwoods, and Brigade owned Northwoods leadership training. That's another whole story, but wonderful experience there. And Daniel Webster rings a bell. At any
Yeah,
rate,
maybe. Did
uh,
Dad start Northwoods?
he helped start it. He helped get the
Yeah.
property. Yeah,
Yes.
1,800 acres. I helped build the dam that dammed up the as a 16-year-old boy. Yeah,
Goodness.
it's a great two summers, parts of 2 summers that I was able to be up there in my middle teenage years. And my buddy, that's the Marine pilot, he learned to fly an airplane at Northwoods Leadership Training
Through the
Center.
aviation program.
Yep, through the aviation program. Moody Bible Institute helped, Moody Aviation helped put that on in those days. And
Yeah.
I was in the Woodsman program. So, yeah,
And
great experience up there. So I do have a couple of pieces. If Brigade ever said, we'd like to have those, I'd hand them back unless Matt or the boys say something otherwise. But one was the torch that was in the leadership place, and one was a sign that hung uh, out over the entrance to the camp that said something about leadership. So when I went to Charlotte, I had one sabbatical in my ministry years, and part of it we went back to Northwoods. Charlotte and I did, and I asked that some local church I think owns the property or did at that point, and I said, "What are you doing with those?" I found them out in some kind of an outback building. Oh, you can have them. I took them. So a little
that's
bit of
awesome.
Brigade history in the
Yes.
office. Yeah.
Keep that. We have a little bit here, but with the move, we're downsizing. We're not getting rid of anything special though,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, we're downsizing a little bit. But those archives are so special. Like as I'm looking through these pictures, actually, I want any pictures that you guys have that you could send me a few. That would be great. I would love it. And you said Matt, are you a Herald of Christ or your brother?
No, no, no one,
No.
neither my brothers nor I.
Okay, so Joe, you
Yeah.
are, and your
Yeah.
brothers.
Yeah. I think I was like number 153 or something. It was a long time ago. But
Well,
my brother also, yeah.
we did have 2 Herald of Christ this year, but the
Good.
numbers have changed a lot
Yeah.
since it's not something achieved as much anymore
Yeah.
um, in Brigade. But
Yeah.
yeah, we did have 2.
Yeah. I've got a picture that's on the wall upstairs that I could take a photo of my dad in front of the Brigade shield. Well, again, he would have been in his 50s, an
Yeah.
old man to me at the time, but
Yeah.
he became young after that. That could be an interesting. I'll take a picture of it and send it to you.
Yeah, if you have any of you and him,
Yeah, there is one someplace I know of me having the Herald of Christ put on. I
oh
might be able to
yeah,
find that.
I have.
Charlotte's our photo keeper.
Okay, yeah, the mom is always
Yeah,
the keeper of the treasures like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
I do have a picture of you and Matt when you came to visit. I have that one.
Oh yeah. They're in the office, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's where
remember.
it was.
Yeah.
Actually, and I
Yeah.
have a picture of you and your son, but I think I made you wear pedaling shirts for that one.
One of the biking. Yeah,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
pedaling for purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Funny.
Um,
I remember. Yeah.
Matt, I guess I
Yeah.
know I wanted to keep this to an hour, so we have about 10 more minutes. I know you're
yeah.
busy.
Yeah.
But did you want to share any memories or anything just of your dad in general? And because I see the men that you are, and I'm not advocating that it's for Brigade. That God has used your family so much, and the fatherhood of just your grandpa to your dad to you, and just the way I've observed you guys being amazing fathers. Do you want to share anything about your dad?
Yeah. I would love to. I think uh, one of the things that Dad mentioned about Grandpa was that the way that Grandpa kind of modeled leadership, and my dad was able to kind of to see that and follow it. And obviously there were other influences in Dad's life beyond his father. He's mentioned some of them, some Brigade leaders, also some folks he was on a board with, some professors that I've heard about, coaches. Um, but similarly, I could say that my dad modeled to me those things like the importance of leadership, the importance of the local church, the importance of caring for your family. Things that I saw my dad not just talk about, but didn't just hear him talk about it, but I saw him live those things out. And yet, much like his father, I don't think I'd ever really heard Dad say this. Because again, this is kind of why I wanted to be here today, was to hear him say some of these things. But um, he said that his dad was always available. He always felt like he was available, and I would say the same thing about my dad. And it's interesting how you see those things growing up, and then sometimes unconsciously you understand the importance of them, and then try to live your life that way and try to model those things to your kids. So while you guys were kind of talking back and forth, I started thinking about, well, do my kids see those things in me? And I certainly hope so. You'd have to ask them, but yeah, I'm very thankful for my father and for those critically important things that he modeled for me and for my brothers as well. Um,
Matt.
yeah, it was always well, for me, it was a relief when I finally understood that I didn't have to go into the family business, so to speak, the full-time Christian ministry. Never felt any pressure to, maybe from grandma, but that would be it.
My mother.
Your
Oh yeah.
mother, yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
that would be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but when I realized I didn't have to, that was a yeah, it was kind of, I remember in high school and realizing that. So yeah, then just the encouragement of my father of, well, there's, I mean, like, the church needs regular people. And it doesn't mean that you don't uh, serve. It doesn't mean that you don't lead. You just don't get a paycheck for it. You do something else, and you serve and minister in other ways than lots of my family has. So yeah, super thankful for those lessons, and of course the ultimate importance of knowing Christ and following Him each day. Yep, all stuff that was taught to me, modeled to me, and very thankful for it all.
So my Christian, my dad quit preaching every Sunday uh, when I was fairly young, but Matt used to sit through, sermon after sermon and week after week after week. So
Sunday
who
morning
knows?
and Sunday night.
That's right.
Sunday
Yeah.
night. Yes.
Yeah.
As I used to say to people, Sunday night was just like Sunday morning, only worse. So yeah, he did. So the boys all got a Christian education from the Bible, and then hopefully a life education from the home. And we didn't talk about Charlotte, but Matt would tell you Dad really wasn't the important one. His mother was. So she's the one that makes it good.
I'm just writing down so many things that you're saying, Joe,
Yeah.
because I love them.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to talk again so I can get more of these lines to use for our social media posts. The Christian education at home and the life application
Yeah.
at the home.
Yeah.
I like it. Do you guys want anything to add? Anything else?
That's an
I've had
honor.
fun.
Yeah, it's an honor to have the conversation. It, one of my favorite more recent lines was Matt was at some meeting someplace with some Brigade people, and one of them said to him, "So is your dad still living?" Speaking of me, so I know where
Yeah.
I am in terms of the generational story. But I love Brigade.
Yeah.
In many ways, I wish I could be doing more, but grateful for it.
Yeah, well, we're grateful for you just being an alumni, and we're really, really wanting to connect with our alumni, just stay connected, to have these stories to, continue the legacy, and, connect us with your friends that you were in Brigade with. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so we can all kind of stay together and support each other and continue the ministry of Christian Service Brigade.
Yeah. Please.